Hola, Monse.
Hola, profe.
Nos vamos te iba a nombrar primero como es hospedador o confitrión. Hospedador, ¿verdad? ¿O qué era?
Pues si se puede como host, estaría también bien.
Ok. Y luego también se va a conectar mi esposa a veces para darle entrada rápido, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Pero cualquiera, ¿verdad? Yo
Ya llegó,
también.
profe.
¿Nos vamos a un grupo o cómo lo hicimos la otra vez? No recuerdo.
Sí, nos fuimos a un grupo.
¿Tú lo organizas?
Sí. Ya voy.
Hello.
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 We made it.
Yes. Sorry again for the confusion.
The confusion is on my end. I'm in San Francisco, which is neither here nor there. So I've been mixing up the time zones. Anyway, we got it right. I'm sorry.
Oh,
It's okay.
thank you for being with us. You always are in my classes. Some of my students have written mails during the last 2 or 3 years, only to get points.
Oh, right. They write me and then I answer them.
Yeah.
Do I answer them or do I ignore them? I forget.
No, you have answered.
Oh, good.
And they were happy.
Well, my mother, were she around, she would be happy too. She always wanted me to be polite.
So we're going to a breakout room. If you can accept, please.
Okay.
Oh. Hello.
Hi.
I've never been in a breakout room before.
Now you have.
Now I have. I can't say that.
A student recommend us that you could be with us in a break room before entering to the whole session.
Yes. How many students do you have in the whole session?
In class are theory, but now they are 150, a little more than 150.
Yeah.
Wow. Super. I should have worn a tie. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
No, it's okay.
No problem.
I'll pretend I have a tie under. It's cold in San Francisco. It's 35 degrees Fahrenheit here now.
Oh.
And I took the dogs for a walk this morning and they wanted it to be a really short walk. It was so cold.
Oh, the dogs didn't want. I am going to present to you and could you speak a little word before the questions about you? Could be right?
Yeah, my understanding is you're going to say a few words and then I'm going to give my life story and then we're going to take questions of any kind.
Perfect.
Yes.
Oh, perfect.
And you're gonna tell me when to start and when to finish. I'll carefully follow the directions.
We think that an hour is good, or is good for you. 1 hour.
Yep, definitely.
Okay.
I'd like to apologize for not speaking Spanish.
You don't have to.
No, it's okay.
My wife, you see, my son just married a Brazilian and he's learning Portuguese.
Oh.
And my wife now has a joint venture with a university in Guatemala. So she is now learning to speak Spanish.
Oh.
But I am, and now I'm going to tell a multilingual joke. Ready? I am semilingual.
Why semilingual?
Well, semi is Latin for half.
Yeah.
So bilingual is double. But I am semilingual. See, I'm only Yeah, no one ever gets that joke, but that's because I studied Latin.
Latin? No.
Wow.
Yeah, the old form of Spanish, 3,000 years ago.
So you can have lessons with us anytime you want.
With Latin.
Gracias. I studied when I was driving to Texas from Boston.
Oh,
I studied Spanish in my car with a CD, and then it didn't stick. So I got to Texas and I met a guy named Juan Gonzalez. I said, "Hola," and he was very friendly. And he said, "Bob, I got to warn you about something. There's a lot of people in Texas who have names just like mine, Juan Gonzalez, who don't speak Spanish.
yeah.
We've been here for 500 years, so we,
Yeah,
you know,
it's difficult.
I learned very quickly.
And you live in San Francisco?
No, it's a little complicated. We live in Austin.
Ah.
We spend the summers in Maine,
Oh,
and then this COVID thing happened. So we moved here for 3 months. Our children live here in San Francisco, our son and daughter.
oh.
And so we thought we'd spend some time with them. And the University of Texas can't tell that we're in San Francisco. So we attend all of our meetings using Zoom.
Oh, okay,
Yes,
yeah.
we do all.
But in January, we'll go back to Austin.
Oh, okay. We are near Monterrey in Texas. And
Monterey is very close to Austin.
very what?
Monterey,
Close, yeah.
close to Boston. We could drive there, I guess.
Yeah, maybe 6 hours or
Yeah.
five,
Yeah, it's
6
nice.
hours.
Well, over my many, many years, I've met many people from Monterey, your fine school.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry I haven't gotten there yet.
Oh,
It's okay. We'll invite you then.
And how do you pronounce your name? Monse?
Monse.
Monse? It's a very long name you have with Monse Cruz.
Yes.
Montserrat is in the middle, and then you have Castillo at the end, and another name in the
Yes.
beginning. Yes, but for short, Monse.
how do you pronounce
Yeah,
your
that's
last
okay.
name? Metcalfe?
Well, my name has 2 silent letters in it. The L and the last E are both silent. So it's Metcalfe. Metcalfe.
Oh,
So
Oh.
so I can't complain about complicated names. My own name has 2 silent letters, which are not
oh,
Metcalfe.
oh,
It's an English
thank
name.
okay.
So the
Encourage-
Spanish put lots of names. The English put lots of extra letters.
Yes, in Spanish, we spell each letter and we say in Spanish, Robert Metcalfe, because all the letters are pronounced in Spanish. Pronounced.
And I'm glad you pronounced the last E, because there are many Metcalfes who don't have the E at the end.
Okay.
But I have the E at the end, so thank you for pronouncing it Calpe. So do we
So,
do we have?
Doctor,
Yes, go ahead.
yeah. Are you going to share something on the screen just to
No.
check if you have?
Okay.
Okay.
Your advice was not to, as I recall.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. I'm going to put a PowerPoint, only 4 slides to present to you.
What is the course? What is the course about? What is the subject of your course?
The fundamentals of computer networking.
Ah, good.
The main, but we invited a lot of people from all the courses.
Who have you had speak so far?
We have
has-
already Steve Crocker and Leonard Kleinbach, and also Vincent Cerf, but he was busy and he said we could do a conference next year, maybe.
So did you say Steve Crocker or Dave Crocker?
Steve Crocker.
Steve.
Yeah.
Oh, that's quite a list. I have to be careful not to repeat what they said.
Oh, it's okay.
Nice. Monse is how you say, a student, very active, intelligent, and do a lot of things. She contacted to you personally, and I appreciate to her that she's active as a student, and I don't know how to say it. Thank you, Monse.
Thank you,
Yeah, thank
teacher.
you. Well, you have to ask.
Okay.
A lot of people are reluctant to ask anything, but you never, if you never ask, you never get anything. You got to learn to
Yeah,
ask.
Yeah.
Nice job.
thank
Okay.
you.
Plus, most of us, by the way, many people in the US have a high regard for Monterey, the institute there. I remember in the early days of Apple Computer, there was the networking guy at Apple was a Monterey graduate.
Ah,
I'm blanking on his name now. The Steve Jobs made an effort to recruit me to Apple in 1979, but when he couldn't get me, because I had my own company, he got this guy from Monterey
oh,
Cool.
who did Apple Talk. So you don't remember Apple Talk because it was too long ago, but
No.
Apple had its own network called Apple Talk, and it was developed by this guy from your institute.
no, estamos en grupo.
I'll investigate.
Ok, ya voy a aceptar. Okay. I'm going, you can wait 1 minute or
Sure.
2 minutes, and I'm going to leave the
Okay.
hello. No te puedo. Okay. Muchas gracias a todos por acompañarnos. Ya tenemos a nuestro invitado Robert Metcalfe. Estaba diciendo que su apellido es Metcalfe. Ahorita se incorpora aquí al grupo, está en una sala y pues el objetivo es que él se va a presentar y luego nosotros le hagamos preguntas. Entonces, ese es el... Bien, gracias a todos. Si van preparando sus preguntas para hacérselas, ese es el objetivo. No va a presentar no tiene una presentación como tal. Se va a presentar él y luego le podemos hacer cualquier pregunta. Entonces, él inventó el Ethernet. Tenemos las redes locales gracias a lo que él hizo. Ha habido muchos avances sobre esa tecnología y se sigue usando Ethernet, aunque ya ha cambiado mucho, pero se sigue usando los protocolos que él desarrolló. Él cambió cuando las velocidades que existían en los modems eran de 9600 bits por segundo. Él hizo una red de 20,000 bits por segundo, 20 megabits por segundo. Aquí tenemos ya llegó a nuestra sala el doctor Robert Metcalfe. Welcome, Dr. Robert Metcalfe, attending our network seminars by pioneers, coordinated by Montserrat Cruz. My name is Rafael Dávalos, and we are in Tecnológico de Monterrey, in Monterrey, Mexico. Thanks to Dr. Robert Metcalfe for being in class in Tecnológico de Monterrey, in Monterrey, Mexico. Thanks to Dr. Manuel Certuche, Dean of the School of Engineering. Thanks to Dr. Joaquín Acevedo, Dean of the School of Engineering in North Region. Thanks to Ingeniero Luis Ricardo Salgado, Director of the Computer Department. And thanks to Montserrat Cruz, student of the class of Networking Fundamentals, who had the idea and made the coordination to bring Dr. Robert Metcalfe to the course. She has coordinated to bring our class this semester to Dr. Steve Crocker and Dr. Leonard Kleinrock. Vince Cerf was in our course in 2018. Dr. Robert Metcalfe is a computer scientist and professor at the University of Texas at Austin. Dr. Metcalfe was an internet pioneer beginning 1970 at MIT and Harvard, Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, PARC, and Stanford, and also Tricom. He invented Ethernet at PARC on May 22, 1973. He remains a champion of Ethernet and connectivity more generally. Dr. Metcalfe has won the Bell, Hooper, Japan CNC, Marconi, McCloskey, Shannon, and Stevens prizes. The way of the presentation is first, Dr. Robert Metcalfe is presenting himself and a first chat in which we can ask him anything. We appreciate your time and effort to be with us. Welcome, Dr. Robert Metcalfe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hesitate to ask, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. I'm looking at this. I'm looking at this beautiful gallery of photographs of all these handsome people, some of whom are not showing their videos, and they're showing their names and their letters. They're shy, I guess. Anyway, we're speaking. I'm in San Francisco right now, and we're speaking over the internet, which I helped to build. So we're going to talk about this thing that's working right now in front of. Look at all that video that's being carried over the internet right now. So I've been asked to say a few words about my history, which my history and the history of the transistor both started in around 1947. I was born in 46. The transistor, which is the key to all this video that you're producing, the transistor was invented in 47. I was raised on an island. I like to joke that I was raised on an island. The island's called Long Island. It's a huge island off the coast of New York City. And I was there for my first 18 years and then was lucky to go to another Institute of Technology beginning with M. I went to MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. That was a little joke. How come no one's laughing or anything? Oh, there's a smile. Oh, there's another smile. Okay, I see them. So I went to the MIT, the one in Boston, and was very lucky to be there and studied computing. So I have 4 degrees from colleges, from MIT and Harvard, all of which, they have different names, but they all mean computing. Because back in late 60s, there were no computer science departments. So I have a degree in electrical engineering, I have a degree in industrial management, I have a degree in applied mathematics, and I have a degree in computer science, and all of them are really computer science with a little bit of hardware sprinkled in. While in graduate school, I had the good fortune to take on as a graduate research project a network called the ARPA Computer Network, ARPA, A-R-P-A, Advanced Research Projects Agency of the United States Department of Defense. And they were funding a network to connect all the universities together. And luckily, I chose to be a grad student in that area. And I built some hardware and I wrote some protocols. Have you all heard of the Telnet protocol? That was my first internet protocol, was implementing some of the first telnets. And the culmination of that was a big interop conference we had at MIT, where all the universities came with their telnet implementations. And we checked that they could talk to each other so that you could log into everybody. So imagine a big diagram with N by N. And over the weekend, we checked each time one university was able to log into the computer of another university, we checked it off as we one by one implemented the protocols of the internet. Then I left, I got my PhD from Harvard, but I did all my ARPANET work at MIT and managed to get out of there and moved to Palo Alto in 1972 and joined the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, where I put, just like I put MIT on the ARPANET, I put Xerox on the ARPANET, and then I got lucky. The computer science lab, of which I was a part, decided to build what is arguably the first personal computer. And that's a whole other argument we can have. Let's not have it today. So we decided it would be wise in 1972 to put a computer on every desk. And I know you don't find that amazing, but in 1972 it was pretty amazing. And that's when I got lucky, because since I had built these ARPANET connections, I was viewed as the networking expert in the computer science lab of the Xerox Research Center. So they gave me the job of connecting all these desktop personal computers together with a network. And out of that came the invention of Ethernet. So the big luck there was not so much the cleverness of the solution, but it was the novelty of the problem. No one had ever had a building full of personal computers before. And this was the first time. At the same time, I was working on the first laser printer. And that first laser printer was a page per second Xerox printer with 500 dots per inch. So if you take 8.5 by 11, which is the size of our paper, by 500 dots per inch by a page per second, that's about 20 megabits per second. So the existing networks that we had at our desks only ran at 300 bits per second. So the first kind of requirement of our network is that it be fast. And in the end, it turned out to be 2.94 megabits per second. And it turned out that, I hope someone's going to ask me later, why did you choose 2.94 megabits per second? So someone has to do that later. I'm not going to tell you now. So we built this Ethernet, and I was at Xerox for 8 years. Think of it as sort of grad school. And we filled Xerox with these personal computers, and we filled Xerox with these Ethernets and laser printers and routers. And we basically built an internal Xerox internet. And then by 1979, it was time for me to leave Xerox after 8 years. And I left and consulted for a while and started a company called 3Com to help build out the internet, to build the various pieces that companies would need in order to be on the internet. So we offered the first Ethernet connections, and we offered the first commercial version of TCP/IP. TCP, Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol. Those are the, do you all know that already, what TCP/IP means? This is a networking course, right? You know that. Okay. So my company offered the first commercial version of that, TCP/IP, and then many follow-on routers and workstations and servers and so on. Eventually got to be a very large company. And then in 1990, I left the company. Took it public. In 1999, after I left the company hit $5.7 billion a year in revenue and a market capitalization, inflation adjusted, of $52 billion. And I want you to know I didn't even get half of that. That's another joke. I didn't even get half of that. In any case, after that, I became a journalist for 10 years. And then I became a venture capitalist for 10 years. And now I've been a professor at University of Texas for 10 years. And what I'm doing now at the University of Texas is helping the startup ecosystem of Texas and helping our professors to take their research and to commercialize it at scale, like we do in Silicon Valley. So is that enough, or do you have, feel free to ask any questions about my background or whatever else you'd like to talk about. My favorite subject is me, so if you ask about me, I really appreciate that. I can't hear you laughing. You can hear me laughing though. So how do we do this? Do you unmute people or do they unmute themselves?
Yes, I'll be calling them.
Okay,
So,
let me know.
Mauricio Alejandro Garza, please.
Hi, Dr. Metcalfe. Thank you for coming to this session with us. And well, my question is, what has been some of the research or development on Ethernet that has surprised you the most?
They're working on, right now, the standards bodies are standardizing 800 gigabit per second Ethernet. And the Ethernet that we built, Dave Boggs and I built an Ethernet in 1972 that ran at 2.94 megabits per second. Does anyone have a calculator handy and want to tell us what the multiple is from 2.94 megabits to 800 gigabits? And that would be my answer to your question. The fact that Ethernet is, I thought Ethernet was stunningly fast in 1972. In fact, on one day, the day before Ethernet, the terminal I had on my desk ran at what was called 300 baud, 300 bits per second. And then the next day, when Ethernet arrived, my desk had 2.94 megabits per second. That's a speed up of 10,000. And that's not counting all the speed up since then, which now takes it to 800 gigabits. So that would be the most surprising thing. The transition from coax, the fact that we didn't start with radio. For many years, people said, well, why didn't you go straight to Wi-Fi? Why did Ethernet use cable at all? Of course, the answer is pretty straightforward. The radio modems in those days were this big. No, bigger than this. They were this big. And they only ran at 4,800 bits per second. That's the Aloha network modem, which is too slow and too big and too expensive. So we went on cable, a shared coaxial cable. So that wasn't surprising. That Ethernet's progress has always been paced by the availability of semiconductors. So we had to wait 25 years for the Wi-Fi semiconductors to finally come along in the mid-90s. And then we could go to radio. So there was no surprise in that. At one point, Ethernet made the transition from coax, the original Ethernet was coaxial cable, to twisted pair, to telephone twisted pair, the kind that your RJ45. Everyone know what an RJ45 is? That neat little connector that you can plug into. So the transition from coax to twisted pair took me by surprise. It happened very quickly, and as soon as it did, Ethernet took off. So Ethernet had been fighting a battle against the IBM. IBM had its own network called the Token Ring, and General Motors had its own network called the Token Bus. And then there were 50 other local area networks in competition, and it was a big fight in the marketplace, and which Ethernet eventually won. And one of the reasons it won was a sudden transition, surprising transition from coax to twisted pair, which suddenly made it easier for people to install. So that would be my answer to your question.
Thank you.
Roberto Telles.
Thanks. Hi, Dr. Metcalfe. My question is, well, you told us that you were at 3Com, and essentially what you did was help build out the internet. So how did that look like? Was it more related to routing or like handling collisions, like knowing that you were going to have bigger networks with more nodes? Or was it contributing like to the standards or the RFCs?
Great question. A key point is that when a new technology, like Ethernet as a technology, comes forward, it's usually not alone. It usually shows up with a bunch of other technologies which are maturing at the same time. So Ethernet was being enabled by faster semiconductors, the personal computer was brand new. Remember, the Apple computer was founded in 1976. And the IBM personal computer was shipped in 1981. So there were no personal computers to network. So that was difficult for Ethernet. But then the internet was coming along, and so higher level protocols were being developed way beyond telnet, way beyond file transfer, way beyond email. Email was a big one. But then some time later, we got, you may have heard of it, the World Wide Web came along in 1989. So the technologies arrive at the same time and they enforce each other. So the internet prior to Ethernet was not personal computers, it was dumb terminals. Dumb terminals connected to mini computers that were interconnected with the internet's protocols. So in answer to your question, I would say what Ethernet did was bring the internet to the desktop. And so suddenly the internet was connecting desktops, not buildings. And the packets, the internet packets were going all the way to the desktop. They weren't stopping at some intermediate mini computer. They were going all the way to the desktop. So one could write whatever protocols one wanted that used internet packets. And Tim Berners-Lee famously in 1989 wrote the first World Wide Web server using the ability, he used a Next workstation with direct access to the internet. By the time of, have you heard of Next? It was, Steve Jobs was at Apple twice. The first time when he founded it, and then he left to do another company called Next. And then he came back and famously became CEO of Apple again. It wasn't until Next that I convinced Steve Jobs to put Ethernet in his computers. The Steve's first phase, he refused to put Ethernet in his computers, but I got to him at Next. And he put Ethernet in his Next workstation. And then when he came back to Apple, that's how Ethernet got into the Apple computers. When Steve saw how wonderful Ethernet was, and he began putting it in his Apple computers. So going back to that question, it was bringing the internet to the desktop at very high speed, allowed PCs to advance, the internet to advance, all the associated protocols all took a step forward now that they could operate at the desktop.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
Pablo Moreno.
Yeah. Well, first, hello, Dr. Robert Metcalfe. Nice to meet you. I appreciate you being here and answering our questions. So I would first like to give some context for mine. So, there's a lot of people focus on making business, and there are other people focus on research and new inventions. So I'm amazed that you did an excellent job both at contributing to computer science field and also being an entrepreneur and even making the big company Tricker. So I would like to ask you, other than just learning a specific technical field, which do you think is the best advice or tip in any area of life that you could give to some bachelor students who want to make a brand new invention and make a business out of it? And also, if you agree, I would like to hear your perspective about the business world as a computer scientist. Thank you.
Well, Pablo, I only heard every other word. Our audio connection is not very good, but I think I got it. You're asking about the transition from engineering to entrepreneurship.
Yeah. In fact, I would like to know how's your perspective as a computer scientist, but how do you see the business world? And also, I would like to know what advice would you give to people that want to make a new invention in the computer science field and make a business out of that invention? Because a lot of people used to stay in the invention part, but they don't make a business out of it.
Right. Well, so that becomes a personal question. Eventually, that becomes a matter of personal preference and how one likes to spend the day. And I'm an extremely unusual person because I made this transition from engineer to salesman. And those are extremely different. They're both, as I like to say, they're both carbon-based forms of life. But otherwise, salesmen and engineers are not very similar at all. I managed to make that transition. I had to make it. In 1982, my company was on the verge of going out of business. and my board fired me as chief executive and made me head of sales. So then I had to, it was a Friday, I had to learn sales by the next Monday because we needed revenue. We had almost zero revenue. And then I became head of sales and started, and in that moment, my mindset changed from engineer to salesperson. And I love both of them. I wouldn't say one was better than the other. They're both, what you do is a question of your personal interests. What I liked was when I initially went to Xerox, I went with the intent of inventing something that Xerox would sell 1 million of. And I don't know where that came from. I just, during the interview process, they asked me what my goal was. And I said, I want to invent something that Xerox, I don't know where that came from. I made it up in an interview. But then I took it as my life's work, the idea of having, you do the engineering, and if it just, you make one of something and it works, well, that's gratifying. But what if 1 million people wanted it? That would even be more gratifying. So it depends where you're going to find your satisfaction in life. And incidentally, building one is different from building 1 million. So as an engineer, I remembered what it was like when I used to build one-offs. But then my company started making hundreds of them, and then thousands of them, and eventually millions per month. And the engineers who know how to do 1 million a month are not the same engineers like me who know how to do one. It's almost a completely different field, and solving different problems. So you've asked a question that relates to personal preference and what kind of lifestyle. I generally promote being an engineer. I have 3 reasons for being an engineer. One is it's fun. It's solving puzzles. It's like doing a crossword puzzle, and I enjoy solving puzzles. 2 is it pays. Engineers are paid more than other people. So if you enjoy having money, being an engineer is consistent with that desire. And 3rd, engineers solve the world's biggest problems. So if you want to work on solving the world's biggest problems, be an engineer. So it's fun and it's profitable and it's worthwhile of your time because engineers solve the world's problems. And incident, I do want to add, being a good salesperson, and there are many kinds of salespeople, by the way, it is as complicated as being an engineer. It's not that engineering is complicated and selling is simple. It's not like that. Selling is very complicated and subtle because it involves, well, engineering, in my kind of engineering, involves these funny little things called electrons. Salespeople deal with these funny little things called people. And people are way more complicated than electrons. So it's, take my word for it, selling is very complicated. It's not the easy way out. Occasionally an engineer would notice that the salespeople were paid more than the engineers. And they would say, and I would say, okay, since you're complaining, why don't you become a salesperson? And I would take them with me on a sales trip, and they would have to get up for a 7 a.m. breakfast. They would have to fly somewhere. They imagined that salespeople played golf all the time. And after about a week on the road, the engineers typically said, okay, I give up. I'm going to go back to being an engineer now because selling's way too hard. Anyway, I hope I've unanswered your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Now, Jorge Armando.
Hi, doctor, thank you for coming again, and thanks for answering our questions. My question is, do you ever think that how technology is progressing, that internet will be faster than Ethernet? The Wi-Fi, I mean, by internet, will be faster than cable internet?
Will will wireless Ethernet be faster than wired Ethernet?
Exactly.
I don't think so, but I've been surprised before. Think of a wire as a copy. A wire is a copy of the ether, and Wi-Fi uses the real ether, the big ether in the sky. And so the advantages of being on a copy of the Ethernet outweigh But you know, the other way, the way it could go differently is that wireless is so much more desirable in many applications than wired, like mobility. So maybe more research dollars will go into wireless than wired. And given the balance of research investment, it's conceivable, therefore, that the wireless could pass wired because it has the advantage of supporting mobility. But right now, wired is, when I say wired, I'm referring mostly to optical fibers now. They're running at hundreds of gigabits per second, and that's not yet possible wireless.
Thank you.
Jose Martin Molina.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and it's an honor for me to meet you, Professor Metcalfe. I am a computer network teacher, and I have 3 questions. I would like to know your opinion about the future of IPv6 over the internet, and I would like to know also if the photo that appears on the internet about the napkin, where you draw the idea of the Ethernet, is it real? The napkin? Do you own this? Finally, what are the business opportunities that you consider that there are currently in communication in using internet? Thank you very much.
I do everything in threes, and Jose does things in threes too, apparently. So I named my company 3Com, and whenever I give a talk, I try to make 3 points. Even if I don't know them in advance, I say, there's 3 answers to this question. And then I start with the first one, hoping that I'll think of the second and third one by the time I get there. Anyway, your first question, the 3Com napkin, and then there's the Ethernet napkin. And there never was an Ethernet napkin. It was, I worked at Xerox. We had mountains of paper everywhere, so there was no need to use napkins. We just used 8.5 by 11 paper. And we used typewriters, not personal computers. The Ethernet memo inventing Ethernet was typed on an IBM Selectric typewriter on a piece of paper, not a napkin, on a piece of paper. And then I went back with a Pentel, a Sharpie, and I drew the diagram of the Ethernet, which maybe you've seen, but it was drawn on 8.5 by 11 paper, not a napkin. 3Com, on the other hand, I invited 3 of my friends to dinner at the Bella Vista restaurant overlooking Silicon Valley, and I invited them to form 3Com. And at that dinner, we had napkins, paper napkins. It's not a very nice restaurant, so we had paper napkins. But I didn't draw a diagram of Ethernet on the napkins. I drew the shares of the company on the napkin. And I was going to get 51,000, and John was going to get 18,000, and Greg was going to get 12,000 shares of the company. That's a really bad way to start a company. And by the way, at that dinner, John said no. Ron said in a year, I'll join you. And Greg Shaw said, yes, I'll join you today. And so the company, so the 2 founders were Greg and me, based on that dinner. And that was, there was a napkin there. Now, John says he has the napkin, but he's not produced it. And I've asked it a few times. He may be bluffing. He may not actually have it. What was your third question, Jose?
I wonder if you can tell us about the current business opportunities that you are that you can see over the communication using internet. I mean, what are the new novel protocols or the new novel services or products that the current engineers are working on, or that we need to discover?
Right. So first, I want to admit to you, I am no longer an expert on that question. And I'll tell you why in a minute, but I'm gonna give you an answer anyway. So I just spent a day with a fiber optics expert, David Welch is his name. Infinera is his company. And he's working on the next generation of fiber optics, where the allocation isn't a stack of lambdas, different wavelengths of different channels of different color on an optical fiber. He's proposing a new generation of optical fibers that have more dynamic assignment of bandwidth to make better use of bandwidth. So he's doing that. So that's way down in the plumbing. But the internet is beautifully organized into these 7 layers. So while David is working down there, other people are working up here. So for example, to go all the way to the top, you may know we have a problem with fake news. Do you have fake news in Monterey? I don't know.
Yes, we have.
It's a big problem. And so working to solve the fake news problem is a business opportunity. The problem is that we have generated in 50 years, we just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the internet last October 29, a year ago. And in that time, in only 50 years, we've reached 55% of the human race. 7.4 billion people are now on the internet. It's a very short time to have delivered the internet, and we don't really know how to handle all that connectivity. We just have more connectivity than we've been able to figure out. And so fake news is one of those things. It's a problem we have because we don't know how to handle connectivity quite yet. Incidentally, the current internet I refer to as the megabit internet. And guess what? What's coming now is the gigabit internet. So if we thought we had a fake news problem yesterday, we have an even worse fake news problem tomorrow. So that's another example. And if you want, I have a startup idea for that, which we could get to. But then there's everyone, IP version 6, which you asked about is, I was writing columns in InfoWorld magazine during the 1990s, predicting that IP version 6 was around the corner in the 90s. And what is this? This is 2020 already. So IP version 6 has been long predicted and slow to come. And I suspect we're going there. We're just going there at an unpredictably and surprisingly slow rate. I'm sorry, I can't think of any business opportunities there. And now comes mobility. So mobility, we got a little taste of mobility in the last generation of the internet, and we liked it. So now the next generation of the internet is even more mobile, and that's 5G, which has begun to arrive. In fact, any day now, I'm going to get my iPhone 12 Pro Max with its 5G modem in it. I can't wait. And then, of course, the telephone companies will have to install the 5G antennas for me to get the benefit of that. That's about all I can think of in terms of business opportunities. Once again, I'm not. Would anyone like to know why I'm not an expert in that anymore?
Yes.
Yes.
I have a new love, a new enthusiasm. For the last year and a half, I've been committed to solving energy once and for all. I'm tired of this constant complaining about how we have an energy problem and it's causing climate change and we're running out of oil and it's getting expensive, blah, blah, blah. So I've decided to work on solving energy. And the answer that I'm behind is called geothermal energy. We harvest all these hydrocarbons in order to burn them. And we burn them in order to generate heat. And then we take the heat and we produce it, we use it to produce mechanical energy in our cars or electricity in our turbines. The Earth is full of heat. The Earth is 6,000 degrees Celsius at its core, and that heat is moving toward the surface constantly and going and radiating out into space. And how much heat is there? That heat's been around for 4.5 billion years, and it's going to be around for another 4.5. It's going to be around longer than we are for 4.5 billion years. There's a lot of heat, and it's not being tapped. Geothermal energy is a very tiny, small percentage of the current energy supply, but it's time to change that. And incidentally, I got all these ideas from my colleague at the University of Texas, Jamie Beard's her name, and she noticed two things. She noticed that the oil and gas industry had learned how to drill, famously so, and decided that if we could get startups in the oil and gas ecosystem, and instead of hating the oil and gas companies, so I call the hippie geothermal people hate oil and gas companies. They won't even go to the same room with them. But the new geothermal people realize that the technologies for harvesting this heat is going to come out of the oil and gas industry. So the trick is to partner with the oil and gas companies and have them pivot from drilling for hydrocarbons to drilling for heat, and then using that heat to produce electricity, for example. I think the highest use would be to put it into electricity. That's why I don't feel up to date on your question, Jose, about the possible business opportunity. There are many of them, and I'm just not focused on that. I'm focused now on deep geothermal energy.
No, thank you very much for your advice, and for your to share with us what are you doing now. Thank you very much.
Thanks for asking 3 questions. I'll just
It's my pleasure.
Well, 2 is not enough and 4 is too many.
Okay, Juan Carlos Juarez.
Hello, Doctor. It's an honor having you. And well, my question is regarding of local area networks. As we know, in companies, we still use Ethernet, like wired Ethernet, because of security. Like wireless networks can be, they are vulnerable to cyber attacks. So what do you think is the future of LAN? Do you think at some point we'll have wireless connections where they can be safer than wired connections?
Yes, I think security is not a really good reason to use wired over wireless. I think the solution to security will apply to both. I don't think wired is much more secure than wireless, because the viruses and the penetrations are all at levels 4, 5, and 6, and 7. They're not down at levels 1 and 2. So I don't think you run wireless. I don't think you run wired Ethernet in order to solve security problems. There may be people who think that, but I don't think that. I don't think that's why you do it. But security is another one of those problems that's been caused by the sudden arrival of all this connectivity. And we need to figure out security, and we're busily trying to do that, and we will. I wrote the first, I believe it was the first memo ever about internet security in December of 1973. We had 2 high school students in Los Angeles broke into the ARPANET and got the password to the root. Well, I think it was ADMIN, I think was the password to the root, if I remember correctly. So these 2 high school students, dialed into the then internet, which had no security whatsoever, figured out that admin was the password for root, and immediately started messing around with some computers on the network. And then I wrote a memo documenting this event. The name of the memo, by the way, was "The Stockings Were Hung by the Chimney with Care." And that's a line from a poem, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. St. Nicholas being Santa Claus. Well, Santa Claus didn't show up. 2 high school students showed up, and they wreaked havoc. But the alarm was raised in 1973 that the internet had a security problem. This is 2020. We still have a security problem, although it's evolved quite a lot. I don't know. Did I answer that question, Juan Carlos?
Yes, you did. Yeah, I thought that it was like a lot of companies use wired Ethernet because of security. So you would say it's because of speed, or why do you say they still use them?
Speed. I think it's
speed.
Well, it's also a habit.
Okay.
And speed. Some people do. Some of us do things just because we've always done them that way. So some of it is that, and some of it is speed, and I suppose some of it is security too. But I don't think that's a very strong reason to do it.
So you believe that at some point, line connections will be all wireless?
No, I answered a previous question which I might be wrong about, was that wired will always be faster than wireless. So I can see
Okay.
people resorting to wired, and by wired we mean optical or copper, resorting to that for speed reasons. I think that's probably the enduring reason.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Eduardo Lopez.
Hi, good afternoon. Is my speaker okay? My microphone is okay?
Yes, and you're crystal clear, Eduardo. I see. I had trouble finding you when you all, but I found you right away. There you are, dead center in my screen.
Hi. Well, actually, I was having a hard time finding like the third question because, well, I think it's important to ask 3 questions. But right now, I'm going to go with this one. Well, now, of course, in these times with COVID-19 and the pandemic and all those stuff, we're having a hard time without internet. I think it's crucial for us to have internet in our houses and to have a good speed and to do things online, like having these meetings, and we all know that, right? But what new network technologies project do you know that are going to overcome the current technologies, the current network technologies? Because it's vital to have a good network in your house, and also to have a good internet, and to, of course, support all the millions of people that are going to rely on internet from this pandemic. So it's really important that. So what network technologies project do you know? You already told us that you weren't related to many of those things because you're now more focused in energy, but I don't know. I would like to know the opinion of an expert like you.
Well, let's just talk about education, since we're involved in that right now. Education has been brick and mortar education, which I went to 23 years of school in bricks and mortar education, has slowly been eroded, first by television and more recently by the internet, so that we're learning less and less in buildings and more on the internet. So internet learning has slowly been taking market share away from bricks and mortar education per se. And then, and by the way, the way innovation goes, those of us who have been professors for a while, remember I mentioned some people like to just keep doing what they've always done. Well, we professors have, a lot of us have been in rooms with chalk and blackboards and talking to lecturers and so on. We've been slower than we should to adopt online learning. And then along comes COVID. And suddenly professors who have been complaining for years that they couldn't possibly teach their courses online are now teaching their courses online, all of them. All of MIT, all of the University of Texas are, I say all, mostly, predominantly online now. Suddenly, this is something that was thought to be impossible. You could never do that. Well, they're doing it. And the early surveys of student satisfaction are high. They're coming in, there's sort of the rejection. The students will never put up with this. Well, you are putting up, look, here you are putting up with it right now. It's amazing. So one answer to your question, Eduardo, is that this Zoom thing we're using right now, which 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 49 of you on my screen right now. And there's a special feature called the breakout room feature, and so on. Zoom is now a bunch of features that we're now enjoying, and the innovation in that space is already accelerating. That is the point you make, which is we need it to be better than it is. I mean, it's already great, but it's going to get a lot better. So we're going to, like, breakout rooms is an innovation that happened recently. And can you imagine 100 more innovations? So business opportunities would be being a better Zoom. IBM's trying to be a better Zoom. Microsoft is trying to be a better Zoom. Zoom is trying to be a better Zoom. So in the area of way up here in the ISO, the 7th level of networking here, there's a lot of innovation, in particular in online internet learning. So the education world is going through extremely rapid, horrible innovation right now because it has to. So then the next question is, when we finally cure COVID, next week probably, when we cure it, will we go back to education as it was? Or how much of this online thing is going to continue? Now, if Monsi had invited me to come talk in Monterey, there's a very good chance I wouldn't have made it, because it would have required a 6-hour drive and probably a hotel and then another 6-hour drive. And I probably, I'm kind of a busy person. I'm not sure I would have made it, but thanks to Zoom, here I am in Monterey, Mexico, talking to y'all. And I think we're not going to go back. We're not going to go back to a strictly in-person model. I think we may go a little bit back, but we've crossed the bridge now. And so when I look at pictures of the University of Texas at Austin, I see all these new buildings going up. And I wonder what's going to be in those buildings. I'm looking at the city of San Francisco, and there's a prominent, the Salesforce building is very prominent in the skyline now. It's empty. There's nobody there. My son, until Friday, worked at Apple. He went in to drop off. He left Apple on Friday after 8 years, a lovely experience. It was time for him to move on. And on Friday, he went into Apple to drop off, the computer that he owed and all of his stuff he owed the company. There was nobody in the office to receive it. He left it there in a pile. There was nobody there. But why are we building all these buildings? What's going to happen? Do we think that COVID is going to get cured and we're all going to go back? I'm not sure we know the answer to that question yet, but there's business opportunities there, learning to better utilize all this connectivity that we're currently enjoying in its current form.
Thank you, Robert. And well, I appreciate that you made like the Ethernet possible, because we wouldn't be here. So I want to thank that as well. And yeah, well, who knows? Maybe servers, or what are they going to do with those spaces? I don't know. Hopefully something productive, but let's wait to see.
Allow me a slight digression here on pronunciation and punctuation. I believe Ethernet is pronounced Ethernet.
Ethernet.
And I believe it's capitalized. And I believe the word internet is also capitalized. The New York Times has decided that the word internet is not uppercase I, but I disagree with them. So I think Ethernet, you heard it here. I think Ethernet and internet are both, the first letter is capitalized, and Ethernet, which has 3 E's in it, is pronounced Ethernet, okay? 2 of you said Ethernet, and I wanted to correct that while I could. Maybe Ethernet is how you pronounce it in Spanish. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. I'm sorry for not speaking Spanish. My wife is studying Spanish now, and my son is studying Portuguese, but I am still semilingual. Did you all get my joke, semilingual?
Yeah.
Have you studied Latin? And semi means half. So semilingual means I speak half of English.
Actually, in Spanish,
that's a hilarious joke.
we use a terminology for that. That is Spanglish, which is like the mix between Spanish and English. So you use Spanglish because you mix words from English and you use words from Spanish. So that's like our
Spanglish.
Yeah. So yeah.
My grandmother spoke Norwenglish. She was Norwegian, and she always had. So we called her language Norwenglish.
That's a joke.
Anyway, thank you for letting me digress. Do we have any more questions that are to the point?
Yes, we do. Santiago Andres.
Yep, it's me. So first of all, Doctor, thanks a lot for your time, and it's really an honor to have you here. And my question is, how do you find the right people to work with?
Well, that's probably the most important thing, is finding the right people to work with. Since we just were on the topic of language, let me suggest some English. A lot of people say they hire good people. You hear that word hire? They hire people. And I hate that word because my grandmother was in the hiring business. It was her job to hire longshoremen to load the docks, to load the ships in New York City Harbor. She would hire them. And what hiring meant was they all show up begging for work and you pick the ones that you want. And the answer to your question is nothing like that. That is, you end up with the good people not by picking them out of a long list of people who want to work with you. You have to go out, and the word I prefer is recruit them. You must recruit people. You must find people who are not looking for a job and convince them to join whatever team you're forming. So so what I submit is you think the proper mindset is recruiting, not hiring. And so for example, Steve Jobs, one of his special skills was recruiting. He knew how to recruit people. And I was on the receiving end of that once. I just founded 3Com Corporation, and Steve wanted me to join Apple. And I sat there on Stevens Creek Boulevard in San Jose and watched Steve try to recruit me. It was awesome. Steve had this slight digression, had a reality distortion field. If you got too close to him, you couldn't disagree with him anymore. So when he went to recruit you, he would move in close, and then you just had to go work with him if he wanted you. But he didn't hire people. He found out who the good ones were, and then he went and he recruited them. So so a partial answer to your question is the people that you want to work with are not currently looking for a job. They have something that they're just so good, they're doing something great, and you have to convince them to drop that and pick up whatever it is that you want them to do. And that's a selling challenge. A technique that a friend of mine uses for starting companies is if he reads an article about a scientist who's invented something, he calls the scientist up and he interviews him to learn more about the science. But then he asks at the end of the call, he says, by the way, who are the other experts in your field? And the scientist will give him a list and he'll write that down. And then my friend Kevin will then call the next guy on the list, learn about the science. And at the end of the call, he'll say, and who are the really leaders in your field? And he would write them down until the list stopped growing. He would keep calling people until the list stopped growing. And then he had a total list of all the experts, and he has their opinion about each other. So from that list, he would then decide who to recruit, who to go after. And he would usually recruit more than one of them. Another kind of answer to your question is you should never recruit the first person who comes along. When you're out looking, a good discipline is to have 3 candidates, any one of whom would be perfect. And then you have the hard problem of picking from among the 3, and you should get lots of help with that advice on it. And then after you pick one of the 3 candidates, and you don't stop looking till you have 3, after you pick the first one, you should probably recruit the other 2 also. In other words, if you're in a fast-growing Silicon Valley company, and you've picked one of 3, what about the other 2? Well, the other 2 are good too. So recruit them also. That's another shortcut to rapid growth with good people with rapid growth. Don't recruit the first person that comes along. Be sure you have at least 3, and then in the end, you should recruit all 3 of them. And then this is a pet peeve of mine, but I've interviewed a million people. There are some people who tell you how horrible their previous employers were. And it's possible there are miserable employers out there. But if the same candidate has a list of 5 of them where he used to work and they're all miserable, the problem isn't them. You see my point there? Yeah. I remember telling this one candidate, so I'm going to be the next jerk you're going to work for. Because he had a long list of jerks that he had worked for previously. Oh, well. Yeah, really good candidates don't waste a lot of time disparaging their former employers. That's all I could think of so far.
That's a really good answer, actually. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ramon Martin.
Hi, Robert. I would like to thank you for all your comments, but I have a question. How do you find the invention of the Ethernet? Because did you start from the scratch, or did you analyze previous protocols to see the advantage, disadvantage? Did you apply your academic background? How was the process of your invention?
Thank you. I got into networking at, let's say, even though I was a student at Harvard, it was at MIT, and I got into networking because that's where the money was. ARPA, the funder of computer science, wanted people to work on its ARPANET, so would put money there. And so I was a grad student looking for support. So that's how I chose to work on the network. And then MIT asked me to put MIT on the network. So I built a piece of hardware that moved bits between MIT's mini computers and the packet switches of the internet. And in doing that, I learned how to send bits down a long wire one at a time. Special skill. How do you send bits one at a time down a long wire? I learned that in building these ARPANET boxes. So then I'm sitting there at Xerox, and it comes time to network the PCs. And there was somebody already there working on how to network the PCs. Charles Simoni's is his name. And Charles had a network called SIGNET, S-I-G-N-E-T, which stood for Simoni's Infinitely Glorious Network, SIGNET, Charles Simoni. And when I arrived, his boss, Butler Lamson, decided that I knew more about networking than Charles did. So he kicked Charles off the SIGNET project and gave him the job of writing a text editor. And then he gave me the job of developing the network for the PCs. By the way, the text editor that Charles wrote became Microsoft Word. And Charles is a billionaire. He has a 200-foot yacht and a helicopter and a house on a, maybe I should have done the text editor. I don't know. Instead, I got to do the network. So then, but Charles's SIGNET was my starting point, going to your question. Charles had taken the design for the ARPANET, which ran at 50 kilobits per second over thousands of miles, and he designed an in-building ARPANET that ran at 50 megabits per second within a building. And after about a week of learning about SIGNET, I immediately abandoned it. I thought it was just too complicated for an in-building thing, these little boxes that you would switch packets through. Although I knew how to do that because we did that in the long haul ARPANET. I just didn't think it was the right level of complexity for an in-building network. And so, and one of the problems we had, and I got stuck with because I had some hardware background, is we had a wiring closet full of all the cables for our network. And what a mess. And every time you tried to add a terminal, you had to find a place to plug it in and move all the other cables away. So I decided it was a very high priority in whatever network we did to use as few wires as possible. And 0 is few. So I looked at wireless and found the Aloha network at the University of Hawaii was a packet radio network. But then I quickly learned that Aloha wouldn't work the radios were just too big and expensive. They were, and too slow. So I was forced to go from 0 wire to 1 wire, and that this wire would run down the center of the hall, and then the PCs in each office would run a cable up and tap into that shared ether. That big 1/2-inch coax in the ceiling would be shared. And we would use the Aloha sharing mechanism. Their randomized retransmissions could be used by the PCs to take turns on the coax. They would use, if there was a collision, they would randomize and retransmit, just like the Aloha network. So the decision to use the coax, we chose to use Manchester encoding, which is the simplest possible encoding. I don't know if you've ever, in networking, you should study Manchester. In every bit cell, roughly speaking, the first half of the bit cell is the complement of the bit, and the second half of the bit cell is the bit. So that guarantees that in the middle of every bit cell, there's a transition, either from high to low or low to high, and that's the clock. So the packets are self-clocking because of Manchester, because there's a guaranteed transition in the middle of every bit cell. And another benefit of Manchester is it could be an on-off thing. You were either driving the cable or you were letting go. And when you were letting go, you could tell if somebody else was transmitting, because their signal, you could see their signal because you would let go. So that allowed you to tell whether there was somebody already using the cable. So the way Ethernet worked, and not the Aloha network, the way the Ethernet worked is it would check the cable first to see if there was a packet going by. And if there was, it would wait until that packet was done. Whereas in the Aloha network, they couldn't do that because it was radio. So they just transmitted at will. And so there were many, many more collisions between packets on the Aloha network than on the Ethernet. So that was sort of the last. No, there was one more interesting thing in the invention, which is, you asked about use of my academic background. One of my specialties is I love modeling things, writing computer programs that model the behavior of things like the Ethernet. And so I was writing, we had David Boggs and I had come, and Chuck and Butler, the 4 of us working on Ethernet. I was going to simulate it before we built it. Dave Boggs and I were going to build the first Ethernet, and I thought I would simulate it first to be sure that it worked, and it did work. But I'm writing the code, and there's this moment in the code where I have to produce the random number for the randomized retransmission. So I looked over at the Aloha network paper written by Norm Abramson in 1970.
The throughput.
And there was no randomized, there was no distribution specified. But I'm writing the code. I had to produce a random number, and Norm had somehow finessed that in the math. So I decided to generate the random number by taking a mask of 1s and 0s and ANDing it with the system clock to get a random number, and using that to count down to 0. That simple. And by the way, every time there was a collision, we had a shift register, would shift in another 1, making the mask double in size, so that it was binary backoff, binary exponential. We called it binary exponential backoff. As you tried to send your packet into the coax, you'd encounter collisions, and every time you encountered a collision, you would back off. That was the secret to having the channel be stable. If you did what the Aloha network did, the channel would blow up quickly in retransmissions, and the maximum throughput you could get was 17%. By checking to see before you send, and by having a collision mechanism, thanks to Manchester, and by having a backoff, you could get 99% efficiency as long as the packets were long enough. So, okay, you now know how Ethernet got invented. What did I leave out?
No.
Oh, I know what I left out. The Ethernet ran at 2.94 megabits per second. Why? If you were designing a network, you wouldn't choose to run it at 2.94 megabits per second. You'd choose to run it at 1 megabit or 10 megabits or 5 megabits, some round number. And we ended up with 2.94. Is anyone curious? Signify by waving your hand.
What about the throughput?
Well, there was no specification for how much bandwidth was needed. There was no requirements document that said we knew we needed hundreds of kilobits per second because we had this printer that had a voracious appetite for documents. But other than that, Dave Boggs and I were designing this card that was going to plug into the Alto PC to put it on the Ethernet. And it turned out our design constraint was nothing. We couldn't fit very much on the card. There were so many square inches, and we had shift registers and FIFOs and serialization and address recognition and the mask and the card was full, and we couldn't find a place to put the clock. In other words, when you put a packet on a cable, you have to clock it out so that the recipient can clock it into the shift register and receive it. And so we had this quartz oscillator and associated passives that we had to put on the card to generate the clock. This personal computer we were building, we noticed it on its backplane had a system clock. That is, the processor, the central processor and the memory had a clock, and it ticked every 170 nanoseconds. So instead of putting a clock on the card, we just ran a wire over to the backplane on the pin that had the clock, and we used the system clock, which ticked every 170 nanoseconds. And using Manchester encoding, there are 2 transitions per bit. So that meant the bits were 340 nanoseconds wide using the system clock to clock the Manchester encoder. And if you take 340 nanoseconds and you flip it over, it's 2.94 megabits per second. That is, the speed of the network was determined by the space on the card and the fact that we didn't have much space. And by the way, 2.94 megabits per second is 10,000 times faster than we had. So it seemed like sufficient improvement over what we had before. So we went with 2.94 megabits. The first standard Ethernet came out of the IEEE at a nice round 10 megabits per second. But by then the semiconductors had progressed, so there was more room on the card. You could use many fewer semiconductors for the same functionality. So IEEE went 10 megabits per second, nice round number instead of 2.94, which I've always liked. How'd I do, Martin?
Okay, no, it's fine. I think it's clear enough for me. I'd like to thank you for this explanation.
Oh, excuse me, I'm playing with Zoom here, so I can see Martin's name, Ramon Martin
Rodriguez Dagnino.
And it's so the Dagnino isn't on my screen. That's you got after Rodriguez. There's 3 dots.
Oh, it's Dagnino, Italian last name.
Ah,
yeah.
Anyway, this is going to change. The naming thing that we're currently using, that's going to change because when someone comes up, I can't find them on the screen. I see 49 of you here and I have to search. So when it's your turn to ask a question, wave your hand and then I'll be able to see you on.
Okay.
Okay. A yellow square appears when somebody's talking.
What appears?
A yellow square.
Oh,
so right now I'm talking, you should see a yellow square.
I'm not seeing a yellow. I see a yellow square around me, but I'm not seeing it around Maurizio.
Okay. All right. Okay, that's
Ramon has the yellow. Ramon has a yellow square. Oh, it went away. Now I have the yellow screen again.
Because you're
speaking. It surrounds the active speaker.
Okay.
Not always.
Okay.
We'll fix that. We'll work on that. Fix that. Was that you, Roberto?
Yep, that was me.
You have a bunch of racks of computers behind you.
Yep, it's a virtual background. I'm not at a network lab, but yep, I'm a bit of a network enthusiast. So yeah, I Googled for a virtual background of a network lab since March.
Okay.
It's a bit messy, I think. Like I can see some loose wires, but looks pretty
Be
cool.
careful now. Those wires are Ethernet, so you should have a high regard for them.
They are indeed.
Who has a
Okay,
question?
Sus Jimenez.
Hi, over here. First of all, it's an honor to be here today, having this conversation. And Robert, first of all, I want to thank you really very, very much because you invented the Ethernet. That's why now I have a job I love, working with networks, with computers. I actually installed my first network at home using a 3Com hub back in the 90s. And all these years have been very, very important for me. And it's a lot, a work, a job I love, a job that has brought food to my table and to my family's table. And I really, really appreciate that very much. So that was the first thing. The second thing, I also now have the opportunity to do other things you talk about, to making something to change the world, the future. Now I also have the opportunity to teach, to have a few classes at Tec de Monterrey. Some of the students here take class with me, and I really love that. And for that, I would like to ask you a piece of advice as a teacher. What do you think that would help me or help us be better teachers for the new generations and new people in the world? And well, the third thing I was wondering if you could talk about is that one time in your life when you faced like a huge problem, a huge barrier, uh, when you tried to do something, and how you were able to get over that huge problem in your life, because I think that your experience will help us. I don't have many opportunities to really thank somebody with your experience, with all the things you have done in your life. I really appreciate that very much, and that I think will also help us to continue facing the many problems in our lives, in our professional life, on this coronavirus situation we're living, and that. So, thank you.
Let me get to your question in a roundabout way. In 1959, I had a high school teacher named Mr. Gozier, and he had the idea that I would use my train set. I had, electric train model trains. Most American boys in those days had model trains in their basements. And this teacher suggested that what I do with these lights and switches and relays is that I build a computer. So I built a computer for Mr. Gozier. This computer would add any number between 1, 2, and 3 to any other number between 1, 2, and 3, and it would produce a light between 2 and 6, 2, 3, 4. The right light would turn on if I clicked the switches correctly. And then Mr. Gozier gave me a grade. He gave me an A triple plus H superior was my grade. And anyway, that encouraged me to be an engineer, to get that. Many years later, like 2 or 3 years ago, I was invited back to my hometown to be inducted into the Hall of Fame of my high school. And they asked the recipients of the Hall of Fame to give acceptance speeches. And so they gave me 2 minutes to speak about anything. So I told them the story that I just told you about Mr. Gozier and how he, got me encouraged to be an engineer and a scientist by encouraging me to build this computer that he called it. Well, when I was finished my talk, I looked at the audience, and the entire audience was looking over there. So I looked over there, and there was a man in a wheelchair, and it was Mr. Gosier was sitting there listening to me tell this story. So I was thanking him the way you just thanked me, only my loop with him was 50 years. Our loop is only a few minutes, I guess. I love that story. How come you don't love that story? I don't see a lot of love on that story. Anyway, Mr. Gosier, thank God for him. What was your third question?
About a huge problem you faced.
Yes, okay. The trouble with that question is that I've had so many situations like that, it's hard to choose them. One of my favorite ones is that we introduced Ethernet to try to make it a standard to the IEEE. We did that in 1980. And the world's largest computer company with 95% market share, called IBM, decided that they were in charge of making standards, not Ethernet or not the IEEE. So the IBM Corporation decided to fight Ethernet in 1980. And they submitted their own standard to the IEEE committee. And this is 95% of the computer industry saying we should use the IBM token ring instead of Ethernet. And I was the champion of Ethernet, so I was going against the IBM Corporation. So every day I would come to work, and my coworkers and my board members and my investors, my wife would tell me how I was doomed, that 3Com was about to crush, not 3Com, IBM was about to crush Ethernet. And we were doomed. And I said, no, we're not doomed. Ethernet is great. And IBM makes the standards around here. So my board of directors made our company, made me do IBM Token Ring. It turned out that 3Com, my little company, being a startup and being very fast, we brought IBM Token Ring to the market before IBM did. They're being so big and slow. And we had a heck of a time selling it because we were an IBM. And because the IBM standard for Token Ring wasn't authentic. They weren't really into having other people sell competing Token Ring products. So they sprinkled software dust over their Token Ring implementation so that our products, which were Token Ring compatible, weren't really IBM compatible. So it was quite a struggle. But eventually Ethernet won, and here's one of the ways in which we won. We're selling these Ethernets and having a heck of a time selling them to large companies because there were these people at these large companies who were called CIOs, Chief Information Officers. And they would not buy Ethernet because IBM told them not to buy Ethernet. They were basically the CIOs of major companies were all employees of the IBM corporate, not really, but for all practical purposes, employees of IBM. So we had to find somebody else to sell our products to. And we did. We lucked out because the same year we brought our Ethernet cards to market, a new idea was had, which was to have computer retail stores selling personal computers, not to the CIOs, but to individual employees of companies for their own use. So we started putting our products below the CIO into the they were called work groups. And instead of the corporate information center, we were selling to work groups, and that worked. So the same people who were buying PCs by increasing numbers instead of mainframes, big IBM mainframes, those same people started buying Ethernets. And the joke we used to tell was at a certain company, our sales guy would come back from calling on a company, and one of our current common refrains was, we're going to have to wait for him to die. That is, we're not going to change that CIO's mind. He's locked into IBM. We're going to have to wait for him to die. So while waiting for him to die, we were selling our products to the work groups underneath. And that was one of the ways that we overcame this monster of an obstacle. By the way, I have 30 or 40 more obstacles if you'd like to hear them.
Thank you. Really, really interesting. And
Well,
thank you
here's
for
one.
sharing it. Yes.
Have I mentioned that I did my research at MIT, but I got my PhD from Harvard? And if I haven't, I just did. The trouble was that when I went to do the oral defense of my thesis, which was a week before commencement, and I was in Cambridge and I had accepted a job in Palo Alto at Xerox, and my wife had resigned her job at MIT and accepted a job at Stanford. And we were all set to move. We found a place in Palo Alto to live, and I go up to Harvard to defend my thesis. And I failed my oral defense. That's a pretty huge blow. So the reason I, of course, failed it is that I did all my research at MIT and I expected to get a Harvard PhD for it. At my defense, 2 or 3 of the committee members I had never met before. Don't ever do that. If you're ever going to defend something, be sure you've met all the people before, so they know you a little bit. And I stupidly went to a defense without having previously met all of my committee members. That was really bad. The good news is my employer, Bob Taylor at Xerox, when I called him up to tell him the bad news, he said, "Oh, don't worry, come on out to Palo Alto and you can finish your dissertation here at Xerox." So we got to make the move, and a year later, I did manage to squeeze past the oral defense and get my PhD. By the way, my PhD dissertation is available on Amazon.com. It's called Packet Communication. And I mean, how many other PhD theses are still available on Amazon?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So this is a defect we have to fix with this Zoom thing. I would like to hear you all laugh when I tell a joke. I mean, even if it's a bad joke, I know a bunch of you laugh just to be polite, but it would be cool if I could hear you. But instead I see these little microphones with red slashes through them, and I can't hear you laugh. We got to fix that.
Okay, now we're having the last question from Miguel Ángel de la Fuente.
Yeah, just give me a second.
Oh, you're right about the yellow box. It just jumped over to Miguel's screen.
Hi, Robert. Thank you for coming. And I have a bit of a personal question. So if you're okay with it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. What am I okay with? I'm okay with what?
With a personal question. A bit of a personal question.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So how do you think that your incorrect predictions shaped the way that you have lived your life for today? Like, how has your incorrect predictions shaped the Robert Metcalfe that we have in front of our screens today?
Well, if you go to Wikipedia, you'll learn that the people who are in charge of Wikipedia don't like me very much.
Yeah.
So in my article, it really plays up the fact that I made some interesting predictions that turned out not to be exactly true in the past. So for example, in 1995, I predicted that the internet would collapse in 1996. And so in 1997, when it didn't collapse, at least it didn't collapse as much as I predicted, I ate my column. I literally ate the column. I tore it up and put it into a soup bowl, poured some water in it, and then ate it. By the way, it's hard to eat paper. Don't ever promise to eat paper. Paper is very hard to eat. And the way I ate it was with water and drank it like a soup. But I actually checked because I was in front of 1,000 people, all of whom were web experts. And they really wanted me to suffer because I had predicted the collapse of their web. And so I had to establish that you eat soup. You know, when you don't drink soup with a spoon, you eat soup. And I had promised to eat my column. So I had to establish that eating it as a soup qualified as eating. And then I ate the whole column and held the bowl empty above my head. So I had to write a book. So the book is called Internet Collapses, and it tells the whole, well, it tells much more than this particular story, but in particular, it tells this story of this prediction. And just to make a long story short, I'm an Ethernet plumber. One of the things I know how to do is measure how many packets are getting through. And when at that time in 1995, the internet had outgrown its existing infrastructure and was losing a quarter of the packets that were being sent in, a quarter of them. And TCP/IP, I knew because I had implemented it, didn't do well when you lost packets. It didn't respond. It didn't recover very well when it lost packets. So the internet was misbehaving. You'd click on a web page, and then you'd have to wait forever for the page to render. And sometimes it would never render. The screen would just hang because packets had been lost at the wrong time. So it was based on that experience that I started writing I was writing columns in InfoWorld at that time. I wrote a column about how this was a bad sign and the internet was going to collapse next year with all this traffic that was coming. And I predicted a gigalapse, an outage of the internet of 1 billion lost user hours. And it turns out the highest the outages got was 118 megalaps. So I was only off by a factor of 8. But being off that factor of 8, I was obligated to eat my column, which I did. And then I wrote this book about it called Internet Collapses, which, by the way, is also available on Amazon.com. And you could buy it for less than the shipping charges. Is that the is that the last question?
We have a couple more, but if you want to answer them. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Josue Cano.
Hello, Doctor. It's a pleasure to meet you, and thank you for being here, sharing your knowledge and experience. A moment ago, you shared your current interest in energies. However, if you were currently going back to being a university student, what would you be working on and why?
I've been asked that question many times, and so I have a standard answer to that. I would be in computational biology. In fact, most biology is now computational, so that doesn't narrow it down very much. But the field of life sciences and biology is at approximately where the internet was in 1980. Big breakthroughs are coming. I mean, we are going to cure COVID. I mean, it's going to get cured. They know how to do that. They're going to figure out how to do that, these guys. So if I were a student, I would be majoring in biology with an emphasis on computational methods. But by the way, there's a million interesting things. That's only one of many. That just happens to be the one that peaked for me, just like networking peaked for me in 1970. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Now, Adrián Martínez.
Here, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, Adrian.
Okay. First of all, thank you for being here. It's been a really good session. I have enjoyed it a lot. And my question has to do with automotive Ethernet. I want to hear your opinion about the increasing demand that it's nowadays for smart mobility and extra functionality in vehicles. And I want to hear your opinion if you think Ethernet will replace CAN as the main protocol. And of course, in the past years, there have been a lot of development in this field of automotive Ethernet.
Yes, there has. It's surprising. So Ethernet and CAN are going to coexist for a very long time. And by the way, I just got a Tesla. And I know there's an Ethernet in there somewhere. I just haven't figured out where it is yet. I'm going to start taking it apart this next weekend. Look for the Ethernet in there. But there is a standards activity, automotive Ethernet. The big car companies are adopting Ethernet and putting it into cars. But now let me tell you a secret about the word Ethernet. Now that I've tried to teach you how to pronounce Ethernet, let me try to explain what it really means. One of its meaning is whenever a new technology is discovered or developed, the marketing people decide it's wise to call it Ethernet. Because Ethernet has such wide adoption and there's so many people who know about it. And so whenever there's a new technology, it's called Ethernet. So therefore Ethernet goes on. So Ethernet would have gone away a long time ago if you took it to mean the CSMA CD thing that Dave Boggs and I built in 1973. That was gone in 5 or 10 years, but by calling, so automotive Ethernet is Ethernet with some improvements. They have, for example, make it more real time and give it different wiring and different connectors and so on. So it's hard to see why it's called Ethernet, but it wants to inherit all the years and years of accumulated knowledge and software and so on that come with Ethernet. And so it's automotive Ethernet. The Airbus, you know, the big 380 that they're now retiring, it has Ethernet in it. It's fly-by-wire Ethernet. So airplanes have, the F-16 has Ethernet in it. But it has it's Ethernet which has been modified for very special purposes, particularly real time. Is that your question?
Yes, it
Are you
is.
Adrian or Martin?
Adrian. Adrian is good.
Adrian. I answered your question.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so automotive Ethernet is coming. It's already in planes, so it's already in cars too. I'm gonna find it in my Tesla. It's in there somewhere.
Okay, Pedro Rodriguez.
Okay. Hi, Doctor. Thanks for coming and for your time. And I have this question that if you had to do the development of Internet again, some kind of time travel, I guess, what would you do different this time?
I sort of have this rule about not changing the past because my present has worked out so well that I'm afraid if I went time travel, as you suggest, and changed something, that it would spoil how well things have worked out. So I'm really reluctant to change the past. What would I have done differently? Oh, I know. Here, oh yes. In the memo inventing Ethernet and in subsequent developments, on the occasion that 2 or more stations attempted to send a packet at the same time, I call that a collision. And that was a mistake. Because as you know, any of you who have been involved in a collision, it generally involves bent metal, broken glass, and sometimes blood flowing because of a collision. So when people considered the early versions of Ethernet, the word collision made them think that when 2 packets were being sent at the same time, that was a horrible thing that needed to be avoided at all costs, when really it was how the cable got shared. There was a simple mechanism. But by calling it collision, I got a lot more resistance to the idea than it deserved. So that was one thing. I'd call it something else.
Thank you so much.
Naomi Zach.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to apologize by the fact that you cannot see my face. I'm having trouble with my connection, but it's ironically.
This is Isaac.
You're on mute, Isaac.
You're on mute, Isaac.
Oh, I'm so sorry. First of all, I would like to apologize by the fact that you cannot see my face. I'm having trouble with my connections. What it's ironically, it should be Ethernet cable for telephones. Anyway, I would like to ask you, you as a pioneer of connections, how do you think that the future of these ones will be?
The future of what?
Of connections will be.
It's a huge question with many answers. The RJ45, which is the current cable connection for Ethernet, is after my time. When I was working on Ethernet, we were still using coax, and then in 1990 or so is when I sort of stopped working on it, and that's when shortly thereafter the RJ45 came along. That's what you mean by a connector, like the RJ45?
Yes.
Yes. So since then, a lot of the connections have been optical, and that has special requirements. I think the goal is to eliminate connectors and go more and more toward wireless, and only for very special cases would you use wired. Like, so for example, do you have LTE in Mexico on your cell phone? LTE?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes. Yes, in some parts, in most parts of Mexico, yes.
So if you ask a telephone company what LTE means, they'll tell you it means long-term evolution. But I have a different answer. Leads to Ethernet. Because in the cellular system, they try to get on wired Ethernet as quickly as possible. That is, they want to use as little of the airwaves as possible. So these mobile networks try to find a land-based wired antenna as soon as possible to get off the radio. So whenever you see LTE, you should think leads to Ethernet. But that puts Ethernet more and more into the backbone and less on the edges. So in answer to your question, I'm expecting that there'll be fewer and fewer connectors, and they will be very high performance connectors inside the backbone typically, rather than out on the edges like the RJ45 is today.
Thank you very much.
And the last question from Mario Manuel.
Yes, hi, I'm Mario. Can you see me?
I can.
Excellent. Well, I have this question about quantum technology. Do you think that the Ethernet, the current Internet that we have will carry on with the quantum computing, or should we expect to create something new?
Yes, I was hoping that we could finish this without getting to quantum.
Sorry.
because Albert Einstein and I agree that God does not play with dice. So I'm stuck with relativity. I haven't really made the transition to quantum yet. I guess the first impact of if you listen to the news, the greatest impact of quantum computing on networking will be the factoring of large numbers into primes, and thereby the undermining of our security system. I'm hoping that there's a more interesting problem that quantum computing can solve other than factoring into primes. There's this great company in Austin, what's it called? StrangeWorks, that's building a software platform, you know, like an operating system on top of quantum computers. But there aren't any quantum computers yet. So they're building the platform running on regular CPUs and GPUs, simulating clusters. And I have a hunch this platform is going to prove to be useful even if they never build any quantum computers. The platform is sufficiently useful. I don't have an intelligent answer. As you can tell, I have no intelligent answer to your question. I just don't know enough about quantum. But you can predict its first impact will be on security.
Thank you. And well, I have this other question. You mentioned how to select the people that are going to be working with you, but how do you select who you will be working for?
Who you're going to be working for?
Yes, in
So
terms
while I'm
of,
answering this question, while I'm answering this question, you should be thinking of your third question. A related piece of advice, I advise students to choose their courses, not so much based on the courses they need to graduate, although that's a consideration. They should choose courses taught by the best professors, the professors who are enthusiastic and the professors who are articulate and knowledgeable and leaders in their field. And for the short time you get to be at the university, you should spend that time in front of the best possible professors. And yes, you have to take certain courses to graduate, but you should aim for the best professor. Well, the same goes for your boss. You know, choosing a boss is very, very hard, and you should choose. You shouldn't go around begging for work. You should be going around looking for a boss that you'd like to recruit to be your boss. And the proper attitude that you should look for in a boss is it's the job of a boss to knock down obstacles that are in your way. So if you can detect that it's not the job of a boss to tell you what to do. Remember, Steve Jobs spoke on this. He said, we don't hire the smartest people and then tell them what to do. We hire them so they can tell us what to do. And I think, so a boss with that attitude that wants to both look out for you and advance your career and hear what you have to say, you should look for that rather than somebody who's good at telling you what to do. Of course, to some degree, you have to listen to what to do because we all have jobs. We need to accomplish things. And part of a boss's job is to coordinate activities to lead to a productive outcome. But that being said, I would look for a boss whose attitude is it's their job to clear obstacles out of your way so you can get your job done.
Thank you. And
now,
well, my third question is about ideas. How do you know that a new technology or a new idea is going to work? For example, how did you know that the internet was the right way to go and not another kind of protocol?
Well, that sort of realization emerges over time. Part of the input to the design of Ethernet, although I haven't mentioned it yet, was that the Xerox Research Center, particularly the Computer Science Lab, was a champion of what was called distributed computing. The old-fashioned kind of computing had a box in the middle with a bunch of dumb terminals on the end. We were promoting a model where the network was in the middle and the boxes were on the edges. That's the model you're used to. We succeeded in promoting distributed computing. So when it came time to develop the network, as a researcher, I wanted to try something that was more distributed. So in the original CSMA CD Ethernet, there was no box in the middle. There was a shared coaxial cable in the middle, not a box. And the algorithms for sharing that cable were completely distributed. That is, the only communication that occurred was through that cable. And along that cable, each of the stations was able to decide how to behave, when to send its packets, and when to back off, and so on. It was all through distributed algorithms. So in some sense, we were pushing the envelope and trying to see how distributed we could make the network be. Now, long term, that did not work out. Today's Ethernet is not a shared coaxial cable. It's not even a shared cable. It's a box, a switch or a router in the middle with things connected off it. So that original idea of pushing distribution to the edge, which we did, persisted for 20 years and then got overtaken by cheaper memories and boxes that, so we returned to to some degree to the box model with these hubs and just switches and routers. So we didn't really know for sure. We were experimenting. We were exploring a new space.
Yes, that's interesting because, well, as you said, You need to know when something's working and something is, you need to go back and check again with the technology.
Now, it's interesting that you've had Leonard Kleinrock speak to you before, because in this battle between the IBM token ring and Ethernet, Professor Kleinrock was on the other side. He was a token ring guy.
Oh.
So he and I, for a long time, we've patched things up now. So we're almost buddies now, but not quite. I don't know if he told you the token ring side of the story, but in any case, there was a fierce battle there. And there was a lot of, IBM was playing dirty. So they were paying professors to write papers showing how Ethernet didn't work. And these papers were nonsense. They pushed the models to unrealistic levels. The packets were too short. They did everything to make Ethernet look bad. And it was quite an ugly struggle. So we had to be confident that it would work. Anyway, my co-inventor, Dave Boggs, was fond of saying, Ethernet does not work in theory, only in practice.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are happy to have you here. It's almost 2 hours instead of 1 hour, and everybody's happy. And thank you, Dr. Robert Metcalfe, for being with us at Tecnológico in Monterrey. And we want to greet you and appreciate all your effort and your time and effort to be with us. Thank you very much.
Hopefully I'll get to Monterey soon. You can give me a tour of the university. I look
forward.
Sure. Real.
Sure.
Okay. Well,
As
thank you very much.
You must try our chilaquiles at Tec de Monterrey. Have you ever eaten chilaquiles? It's a Mexican dish. It's famous at Tec de Monterrey. You should try it when you come.
Okay, it's on my list now.
Yeah.
I'll be there at half the time. I think what I'm supposed to do now is find a little red button on the lower right-hand corner over here, and it says leave. And I'm supposed to leave now. So I think I go over here. Oh, my mouse isn't working. Oh, there it is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Leave. 3,
Thank you.
2, 1.
Bye.
Gracias a todos. Gracias a todos por estar en nuestra conferencia. Es la tercera de esta serie de seminarios. Gracias, Montse, también por esta organización. Esperemos que continuemos con estos personajes, ¿verdad? Que nos dan mucho de su tiempo, su esfuerzo. Y pues si se fijan, casi no quería acabar, ¿verdad? Le dijimos que 1 hora y todavía por él yo creo que estaría más puesto, ¿verdad? Agradecemos a todos su presencia y los esperamos pronto en algún otro tipo de estos nuevos seminarios que tenemos. Gracias a todos por su asistencia y hasta luego.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias, profe.
Gracias.
Hasta
miércoles.
Profe.
Hasta luego.